All right. I am here with Kate. How are you doing today, Kate?
I'm good. How are
Excellent.
you?
You survived rush hour. You're safe and sound, and
Yes,
we are going to. So you've talked a bit about Gen X, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Catherine D.
I
But
am.
yeah, so she is someone who I think has influenced me on the Gen X question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that my basic thesis on Gen X is that they are culturally dominant, and
Really?
as a result of their cultural dominance, they are unable to see themselves. They're able to criticize boomers, they're able to criticize millennials and Gen Z, but they're not able to engage in that kind of inner critique, despite the fact that they sort of, if you ask them, they'll say, "Oh, I'm the most self-critical person ever." I think that's why we don't hear about them very much, and they're actually, more important, or maybe even the most important demographic group in terms of age in America, in terms of ideology. And so I wrote an
Um,
article saying that they basically, if you want to know where wokeism came from, it wasn't millennials, it wasn't boomers, it was Gen X. Can you kind of respond? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And
okay.
what's missing?
I wish I read that article. First of all, I'm shocked to hear you say that we're culturally dominant, although I will grant you that as far as movies, TV shows, and that sort of thing, I do notice the past 5, maybe 10 years, all of a sudden it's clearly designed straight for us. That to me, I will grant you, that's true. And also, everybody still listens to our music. In fact, they never stopped. I mean, that's a weird thing that, like, whatever was playing in a bar when I was 20 just never stopped. It always was. It never became uncool. So I'll grant you that. I have no idea whether or not we are self-reflective or can't criticize ourselves, because honestly I think for most of us we feel like we were just totally ignored and we're never I mean, there's 10 million articles about boomers and and millennials. When the millennials came into the workplace, holy shit, everything had to change. Everybody was worried, how do we deal with these millennials? What do they need? How can we make sure to keep them? Like, nobody cared or talked about what we needed ever. And partly that's just because the birth rates were lower, especially in the 70s, which is like, I'm at the very end of Gen X. And so we just weren't there. We didn't have that many numbers. You know what I mean? I do feel like, yes, the past 5 years, especially because the boomers started retiring finally, or dying or whatever, and COVID greatly accelerated that. All of a sudden, it does feel like we're in power. But that, I mean, Gen X is old now. I'm like the youngest one. Most of them are in their 50s or even their early 60s, I think. I'm not really sure exactly what the years are. Um, and it's weird to suddenly realize, like, oh, I'm in charge at work. That's weird,
Yeah, I
because
think
it wasn't, there was no on that. And honestly, the millennials were pushing. They were always pushing. They came in and were like, how do I get a promotion? How do I become the boss? They expected all those things. We kind of didn't, and all of a sudden we are. um so I don't know. Can we take criticism? I guess nobody ever says anything. Nobody ever cares enough to criticize us. I
well,
feel
that's
like,
the
so yeah, I don't know.
there's a couple things in there. I think Gen X is capable of self criticism on an individual level. I don't think
Hmm.
they're capable of collective criticism at a generational level, which you could say
Yeah.
boomers are even worse, right? Because boomers, we did everything good in our day and you young people ruined everything, right? Gen X don't have that attitude. Gen X don't think that millennials ruined everything. They have a much more nuanced take. They do tend to kind of resent the boomers, like, and some of what you're saying, I think it lines up with that, in saying like, oh well, when I went into the workplace, no boomer ever helped me, and then when these millennials came in, I was just there, helping all the millennials. So there is this sense of Gen X, in terms of parenting style, being different from the boomers. That the boomers really were kind of like, it's up to you, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Gen X takes a very different approach. And where I want to highlight this approach, and where I do think Gen X has been culturally dominant, besides the fields that you've mentioned, is in education. So when we look
Mm.
at wokeism specifically around the age, or the year of 2013, We could quibble if it was 2012, 2014, whatever. So let's just take 2013. So the kids who would then go on Tumblr and create wokeism, I mean, as to just narrow that down into a specific phenomenon, their middle school and high school teachers during that
Mm-hmm.
year, if you look at the average age of teachers, those teachers
Mm-hmm.
were Gen X. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
millennials, they weren't boomers, they were Gen X. And
Mm-hmm.
so to me, the reason why you get this class of people who are basically like K through 12 MLK extremists. What I mean by that is, you go to school, you get a certain narrative of America and in our history, about the Civil War, about slavery, about Native Americans, and the generation that took that and ran with that to an extreme extent to say that America is an institutionally racist country and therefore it's evil and therefore we need like the land back movement and we need to give the Native Americans everything, or we need to like BLM, all of those. The kids who grow up to believe in those things were going through K through 12 under Gen X teachers. And, people who have not been involved in education from that level, maybe they don't, maybe I have a different perspective. I've had a lot of different experiences, but that's one kind of perspective that I have of knowing teachers, talking to teachers, kind of seeing the inside baseball on that is, and I think students recognize it as well, is that teachers are extremely ideologically influential in a way that I don't think everyone appreciates necessarily. Sometimes, like me, I never wanted to listen to the teachers. I was high
Yeah.
in individualism. I was always arguing with my teachers. I was always kind of, not an outcast socially, but I was kind of always bucking the trend and running against the grain. So,
Yeah.
for me, my teachers weren't super influential on my ideology, but I think for most kids, they are. I think they're actually the primary source of ideology for young people. And now with social media, maybe that's changing, but I still think from, basically ages 6 to 12, kids pick up more ideology in politics, at least on a subconscious level, than we give them credit for. And that's due to these teachers, and those teachers are Gen X. So I guess that would be the concise version of the
Well,
article.
okay. And now, I mean, and obviously I wasn't in school during that time, so I can't say all, but that makes sense to me. I will say, I don't think you can blame all of Gen X because teachers are a very specific group. And also the other thing is that I think people my age or people in their 40s we're probably like one of the last generations to go through school where half our teachers were still men. I mean, when I was in high school, half the teachers were men. Now they seem to basically be all women. And when I was in college, all the education majors, I mean, honestly, sorry if this is rude to anybody who's a teacher, but it's known that it's the easiest major. It was like the dumbest people in education majors. It's kind of a joke. It's not even real, I don't know, college level work in a sense. And I have tons of friends from high school and college that are teachers now. They're all women. And, I see, like, I'm on Facebook basically just to stay in touch with college and high school friends. And they are more, not all of them, but some of them are definitely the most woke of everybody I know by far. So it's like that was a specific group who I don't know who led the ideology, but I mean I don't know that either they're just already like that. They tend to be more, just liberal idealistic people who want to help and always be nice and all those things, which kind of lends itself to that. Or maybe they're also more prone to pressure and whatever everybody else is doing. I don't know. The teachers thing is interesting. But God, I probably have like 20, 30 friends that are teachers now, and listening to them is interesting. They all complain about young kids nowadays. But then if you ever ask them questions that push back or say, well, when kids throw chairs across the room and scream and swear at their own teachers, like, what's the consequences? They'll get very prickly and, go to some woke talking point about something. Yeah, no, I mean, I can see that being a thing, but I wouldn't blame the entire generation for that, because on the other side, you also have Gen X. I mean, as far as the polls I've seen, they're more in favor of voting for Trump than any other generation at this point. Not like I want to not like I'm proud of that on behalf of Gen X, but they're not that liberal across the board.
Well,
And
so
that the other thing is that this whole fight between boomers and millennials, I kind of think we were always happy to stay out of it because like the millennials just seem to hate the boomers. We don't hate them that much. I mean, they're old people. How can you have hatred for old people? I just think that's sort of weird.
I think you're an exception here. I think Gen X does hate their parents very much, and
No,
I
I don't
also
hate my
think
parents.
I think that I mean, I'm just going on a crusade. I'm just a hateful person at this point, because I think that when I say Gen X invented woke, I'm not saying Gen X are liberal. I'm saying Gen X are the worst of both worlds. They simultaneously invented woke and they invented MAGA. They are the Alex
Well, they
Jones
did
generation.
vote
They are the
MAGA, yeah.
generation of conspiracy theories. They are the generation of kooky Joe Rogan. They are the generation of
Nope.
the X
I
Files.
don't.
Literally, it's in the
Conspiracy
name, the
theory
X
thing.
Files.
Conspiracy. Well, yeah. Okay. X Files. Conspiracy theory thing is a lot of boomers. I mean, the QAnon people were all boomers, pretty much, and that whole
That's not
crew
true,
that kind
though.
of descend from the talk radio, Rush Limbaugh crowd back in the
Rush
day. Like
Limbaugh
that's
was not doing that stuff, though. If you go back and
no, I
listen
know,
to
but it's the
Rush,
same audience. Like it's
no,
the same.
I understand that it's the Rush Limbaugh is conservative talk radio, and he created that institutionally. He created that audience. Like before that, if you were a working class trucker, you weren't listening to conservative media. You weren't picking up,
Yeah, right,
Rothbard or whatever.
right.
You were probably a Clinton voter. And Rush Limbaugh revolutionized the country in terms of class, and that he started to get working class white men to listen to conservatives, which was pretty revolutionary at the time.
Yeah.
So he can be credited for kind of creating the audience. That's fair. But in terms of the messaging and the substance of what's being said, Rush Limbaugh was a boomer. He talked about welfare queens. He talked about economics. He talked about socialism. He talked about all of those issues that I might disagree with his positions. But he was living in reality. He was talking about crime. He was talking about the budget. He was talking about the deficit. He was talking about spending. Alex Jones talks about a whole suite of other things where I agree with Alex Jones on a moral level. If lizard people were drinking the blood of children, we should oppose them. I agree, Alex, but I don't think you're living in reality is the problem.
Yeah.
And so I think, the entire gamut and I'm not saying 0% conspiracy theories existed before Gen X. That's not my argument. But what I'm saying is that they were the first generation to really inject them seriously into the mainstream political conversation. And it actually started with Bush. So it was Gen X that led the charge. And in fact, when Alex Jones started off, he wasn't a Republican. He was criticizing Bush. He was saying Bush did 9/11. It was holograms. It's the Republicans. It's the corporations. Later, he moved to the term globalist. So that was a slow development over time where all of these people have trickled into the Republican Party. Before, they used to be much more independent. And if you look at polling on Israel, for example, which I'm kind of using as a proxy, I mean, it's fine if people oppose Israel for practical reasons. That's fine. But if you look at support for Israel, it's actually the least among the independents. Now independents sit in between the two parties. But it used to be that the independent voter was kind of like sort of the crazy kooky thing. Those people have been drawn into the Republican Party, partially because of Trump. But I think also there's a deeper history with Reagan and Bush we could talk about. But I guess what I'm saying is that absolutely, are there boomers who believe in conspiracy theories? Absolutely. Are there Zoomers who believe in conspiracy theories? Absolutely. But in terms of the relative intensity and also the paradigm shift, like Joe Rogan, Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, this is a paradigm shift. Rush Limbaugh wasn't doing this. So it's a paradigm shift away from talking about really conservative values and start talking about a conservative paradigm where you're no longer living in the same reality. Like it's the movie They Live, right? Where you put on the glasses and you see, oh my God, these people are actually lizard people. David Icke was right. Like it's a Kabbalist Illuminati conspiracy.
Maybe it's just like it's the same sort of temperament, but applied to these people aren't religious. I mean, that's part of it. So that's why they're not classically conservative. So they're just gonna float around for anything, I guess. And B, they all smoked a bunch of pots. I mean, that's kind of, it's basically what it's like a conservative mindset of fear and dislike of the other paranoia, sort of drug induced thinking of pot and hallucinogens, and take away religion. I don't know, maybe that's what happens.
Yeah, I think there you have a point there about marijuana
I mean, I
induced.
don't. I do wonder. And listen, I smoked tons of pot, so I'm not trying to shit on anybody's recreational habits or whatever. But I have noticed that of the people, because I do know people who literally went crazy, usually during COVID, and they are now basically like schizophrenic. But as an adult, like later, I don't think it's actual schizophrenia because it wasn't in their 20s; it was later, and they believe in conspiracies and they're just nuts. And I knew them when they were perfectly normal people, and I mean, all of them did a bunch of hallucinogens. I do wonder if that is sort of I don't know,
I agree.
can make some people's brains vulnerable in certain contexts to kind of schizophrenic tendencies.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's evidence of that. I think that obviously, I'm not saying that every person who
Yeah,
smokes weed one time becomes
right.
schizophrenic, but there is a
No,
statistical
I think there must be.
increase in schizophrenia as a result of marijuana use because everyone's an individual, right? So some people Carl Sagan smoked it every day for 40 years and he
Yeah.
was fine. Other people, they develop
Well, and
a
not just
habit.
that, but like, I mean, we did a lot of acid in the 90s too. And again, and I did too. And I'm not saying that was going to make everybody crazy. I'm just saying the people I know that have gone crazy, I know for a fact did a bunch of shrooms and acid back then. And,
Yeah.
might have continued to do so. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just know that they were normal and like now they're fully the type of person who sees secret codes in everything, you know,
yeah, I mean,
thinks that there's like secret codes on, on money and signs and everywhere they look.
have you seen like the MAGA moms where they have like the monster can and they're like, see, like the three
Yeah,
claws in Hebrew is the symbol for six, and so it's 666. And
somebody needs to do a study and find out what their drug history is. I would be curious. I mean, I'm not saying it's that, but I am curious because of the individuals I happen to know. I mean, yeah.
yeah,
They start seeing patterns and everything. Honestly, it seems like something that would be so easily exploited if you wanted to, you know, like invent a conspiracy for your own benefit somehow. Just start spreading a rumor that some everyday thing that is all over the place secretly means this, and the people in the secret society, that's what it means. I mean, it seems both dangerous and easily exploitable. So,
yeah, yeah, I agree.
but you've talked about you want a cult, so maybe that's what you need to do.
I want a cult of worshiping the FBI and the CIA and whatever they say is true, and we always trust our institutions. So that's the kind of
That's
cult
not a very
I go
fun
to.
cult,
Well, we'll have
If
orgies and
your
we'll
camera's off, I'm turning mine off.
yeah, I
I
just
don't.
turned it off because of the latency. I had a little bit of
Yeah.
lag, so I thought for
Okay.
the bandwidth it might be good. But
No, that's fine.
yeah, I mean, I think people need community, and I think like the word cult is, I like to use hyperbole. So I think that talking about cults is it's a way to grab people's attention. But there's obviously a distinction between a failed cult and a successful cult, and a constructive cult and a destructive cult. So, like Mormons, I would say are a constructive cult. They started off a little bit rough. It was a little bit hairy at the beginning, but they
Yeah.
pulled through. They're functional member. I have Mormon friends. Like I like Mormons, and I'm kind of a straight edge guy, so I fit in with that crowd. I don't have tattoos and all this drug habits and things, and
I love the Mormons
I
now,
don't
which is
even drink
hilarious.
coffee. So I'm
Oh,
like,
you should be one. I mean,
I should be a
I
Mormon.
like them a lot now. I hated them like the first 10 years I lived in Utah, because it was just too overbearing. But now that it's not, I really like them a lot. And I have to say, fascinating. The neighborhood I live in is pretty much all Mormon boomers. Like all my neighbors are a lot older, and there are Kamala signs all over my neighborhood. It's crazy. I mean, the guy across the street was a bishop. Like they're Mormon, and just I mean, five. That's unimaginable 10 years ago, maybe even five, to even think of a bunch of Mormons with a Democrat nominee sign in their yard. So that's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that are interesting about Mormons is that unlike a lot of Christian or religious groups in America, they're highly educated,
Yep.
and they also tend to, be on the upper income scale or upper middle class.
Yeah.
So, there's this shift going on with the parties where if you go back to Bush Senior, or even Bush Junior, like especially Mitt Romney, I think was kind of the last gasp of this style of Republican Party. Maybe it'll come back. I don't know.
Oh, and
But
they were so devastated in Utah when he lost. Oh my God.
yeah, I
They were
mean,
so upset.
it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I think that there is a direct correlation between Obama and Trump. Like, Obama won, or excuse me, Trump won Obama voters, and that
Yeah.
is how he won in 2016. And so, like, there is like a historical counterfactual. If Romney was able to win in 2012, could we have avoided Trump and maybe gone in a different path, avoided January 6th, a lot of these
Yeah.
things? So I think it's kind of tragic that Mitt Romney lost in a number of ways. He's not a perfect candidate. Whatever. There's good things about Obama too, but yeah.
Again, I hated Mitt Romney at the time, and now I like him. So
It's hard. Well,
you know.
it's hard just because things have become
Yeah.
so much more polarized to
Right.
go back and hate Mitt Romney. I mean, I probably have a lingering hatred for George Bush because of the
Yeah, I do
wars.
too. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like in view of where we are now, it's like, oh my gosh, you're just like a normal dude, and you're not crazy, and it's
Right.
it's not so hateful. Yeah, I mean that's just inherently appealing, and now there's this huge question mark of what the future holds in store. Of can we get out of this, and getting out of this, resolving this problem, because it can't go on forever. We can't just continue hating each other. I mean, societies that where they have this much internal tension, eventually it either resolves itself or it explodes. I would give World War II as an example where we resolved that inner tension. We put away the conspiracy theorists and the Father Coughlins and the Charles Lindberghs, and we said, you know what, you guys just need to go away, and we're going to unite as a country. We're going to fight this war, and we're all going to be one people. Can we do that again? I think it's possible, but it's not certain. There's alternative or darker paths where we just never really resolve this conflict, and it intensifies to the point where, I don't know. I mean, people predict the collapse of American civilization. I think that's unlikely, but I mean, if you don't resolve it, it's the only other option. So, in view of that kind of threat, then yeah, obviously the older style of Republican is more appealing. But the thing that Romney specifically represents is this idea of Republicans can be educated, Republicans can be rich, Republicans can be snobby, and Trump, despite being a rich person, he's like the least snobby rich person. He eats McDonald's.
Yeah,
He's
true.
I remember during it was like Cinco de Mayo, and he put a picture up on Twitter of like him eating a taco, and he's like, I love Hispanics. I'm eating this taco.
Well, also, I mean, he'll like anybody who likes him. I mean, he's literally the most easily bought person pretty much possible, which is why, like, my whole thing when Trump got elected was that I just felt like Democrats and the left or whatever in general made a huge mistake making him out to be this like terrifying monster second coming of Hitler. Like they should have just kept it. He's a joke. He's funny. Make fun of him. He's like a Will Ferrell character, and they should have just manipulated and used his narcissism, because if they had been nice to him, he probably would have done a lot of stuff they wanted. But I mean, it's too late now. And I mean, he's just like, he's so desperate for approval and fame and love that it just seems like he's very easily exploitable, and they could have tried playing on that and being, I mean, I know it hurts, you know, your integrity to do it, and people don't like to feel like they're being nice to somebody that they think is a jackass, but I it would have been a better outcome than what they did, in my opinion.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they Nancy Pelosi could have gone up and said, you know what, Trump, we actually like you, and we're gonna.
If she could have swallowed her pride, it would have worked. I mean, don't you think? He's not even really a
Um,
conservative. He has no ideology or principles. He just
yeah,
wants to be famous and in charge and have people tell him how great he is. So, I mean, I grant you, it's a lot of pride swallowing to do that, but
I guess I'm
it would have been a better.
suspicious.
It would have
Well,
been a better
okay, so
outcome.
you're probably right in terms of the First Step Act. I think Kim Kardashian literally and Kanye West went to Trump and they're like, "We
Yeah,
love you. Please let
right.
these people out of prison." And so I think you have a point in terms of issues where conservatives honestly really don't like. I'm talking about the conservative establishment that coalesced around Trump because his administration was not him. Like he was not able to do, like, he wanted to get out of Afghanistan, he was not able to do that. He wanted to end Obamacare, he was not able to do that. And so uh, a large part of Trump's administration, it wasn't like him personally going around and making decisions. It was like him just kind of reacting to whatever was happening at the moment. Like, for instance, he appointed some Supreme Court justices. When that happened, people they swooped in and they said, Trump, you need to appoint this person. And you know, like a lot of these things are coalitional, and so yeah, maybe on some minute issues here and
I
there.
mean, I just think I think that because listen, the Democrats have all of the celebrities right in their camp. They always have. Uh, I guess other than Kanye and Kim Kardashian, they could have, and Trump loves fucking celebrities. They could have used. I mean, this is how low, you know, my opinion is of him. That is how easily seduced I think he would be if you had used. I mean, it might not have. Yeah, he might not have listened to, you know, just whatever, some boring wonky Democrats talking about policy, but if they had gotten basically any celebrity to convince him we're going to go on TV and we're going to put on a show or we're going to do this policy, I bet he would have done it. He would have done it for pretty much anything. And he would have been psyched to be getting the people that in his mind are high status and classy and cool and that he wants to be associated with. Because I doubt he even really wants all these like white trash people being his constituency. It's just that that's all he has. I mean, he would rather
Hmm.
have people in New York City loving him than people in bumblefuck Kansas. But
Yeah,
that's who loves him, so that's who he plays to.
the people that Trump always appeal. I actually I disagree. I think that Trump is not seeking Mitt Romney's approval. I think he actually kind of hates Mitt Romney, and that's because of his family history. That
No, he wants all the rich celebrities in LA and New York City. That's who he wants.
well, he's getting a lot of
That's who he
rappers
wants.
to support him now. So
Yeah,
I
right.
think he's
Rappers.
actually been quite successful in that regard.
He wants Taylor Swift. And listen, I don't even know who celebrities are nowadays. She's the only one I ever hear of. I don't, are there any movie stars? He wants Beyonce. You know, that's who he wants. That's
Yeah,
who
he
he'd love
wants
to get.
Rihanna.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I think he's gotten some celebrity. I think he's. It's just I'm saying in terms of like,
It's too late for all this now, trust me.
right,
But
right, but
I think it could have been done in 2016 because at that point, half, half of his own party was against him. Like they weren't even really, they were
mm,
not really in his corner either.
yeah, it's interesting. So before the election, or before November 6th or something, absolutely there was a period where like the grab him by the pussy tape came out,
Yeah,
and his Mike Pence was just like incognito, like nobody knew where Mike Pence was for like 7 days after
yeah.
that. He was honestly probably had a million calls from people saying like, we need you to drop out of the race because that's going to kill Trump because we just can't do this. We can't. And actually, interestingly, had Mike Pence dropped out of the race, I could very easily see Trump losing the race because it was such a thin margin. So it's interesting that, years later or 4 years later, Mike Pence became an enemy of Trump, but he couldn't see that at the time or whatever. It's interesting to look at that counterfactual. But yeah, as to the point of how much Democrats could have influenced him by sort of bribing him with attention. Again, I think on marginal issues, you're probably right. I think on big policy issues, I think that's the case where Trump really failed. Like, he didn't get any big policy done at all. And I think that's because, to a great degree, he was unable to force those things. That he was not a leader in his party. He was essentially, as you've described, he is ultimately kind of a follower in an ironic way, even though he's kind of also a cult leader. He's a leader in terms of pure personality. He's not a
Yeah.
leader in terms of policy. And so as a
No,
result,
he doesn't care about policy at all.
yeah, he doesn't care about policy. And so he just got into office, and then he had this chief of staff who was telling him who to hire and what to do. And he's like, sure, whatever. I don't really care. I just like loyal people. And so, the Republicans got their Supreme Court justices, and they got some tax breaks, and they got some normal Republican stuff. But there was no big, bold policy. And so I think even if Democrats were nice to him and kind of used the carrot more than the stick, I just think Trump wouldn't have cared. He would have been like, okay, thanks for your support, and now I'm going to go back to watching Fox News or something because I just don't give a fuck. Like, I don't care about the country. I don't care about
Yeah,
policy.
I mean, I
It's
guess
all about me.
I just see him as somebody who is really driven by the fact that he was always rejected by New York City society. They never considered him one of them. He was new money. He acted like a car salesman, and they never respected him. He never got over the whole thing that Obama made fun of him at that correspondence dinner, and he just is desperate for approval by those people. And he didn't get it. And now it's too late. He's way too embittered. He's been impeached or tried to be like 3 times and investigated. I guess if they had wanted to go the other way, that they should have done, if they had wanted to take him out at the beginning. And again, way too late now. Everything's way too entrenched. Is the Democrats should have, instead of focusing on some stupid call to Ukraine and on these other things that just regular people don't care about, they should have focused on the Stormy Daniels thing, which they didn't, because in Democrats, we don't judge people's sexual, what they want to do, right? I mean, like, they couldn't use that because basically ever since Bill Clinton, that's not, you can't criticize somebody if for consensual whatever, even if it's infidelity and having sex with a porn star like 4 days after your wife gave birth. So they wouldn't touch that. They wouldn't really make a big deal or like try to go after him for that. But if they had, they would have made all these religious conservative women not like him, and they just didn't make a big deal out of it.
Are you
That would have made it so like he would have lost enough support among those women that I don't think he would have won. But now, now it's too late. Now everybody's already bought into the
Did
cult
we even know about Stormy Daniels in 2016?
Yeah, we did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it definitely became.
But it wasn't made a big deal of, because I'm telling you, like, the
That's
Democrats just don't want to make a big deal of those things.
That's really
if yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I didn't pick up on that. Obviously, for the last 4 to 7 years or something, I feel like we've been flooded with daily. I mean, whatever. I think everyone knows about Stormy Daniels at this point, but obviously, in 2016, nobody knew about Stormy Daniels. So, I don't know. I think from my perspective, I don't take a popular vote perspective on the 2016 election. Like, I think, he could lose a greater percentage of evangelical women or something. I don't think that constituency put him over the line. I think
maybe not. I guess.
I think really, like, I have probably some affection for Hillary Clinton that other people don't share. But I think Hillary was really just a bad candidate for 2016. I think she would have done great against Jeb Bush. I think she would have done great against any normal Republican, because I think she's smart. I think, if you compare her to Kamala, she's actually a better speaker. Like, she's more confident. She doesn't stumble over her words. Like, I think she's actually fairly competent in what she does, and she has clear ideas and whatever. Maybe she's a sociopath too, but maybe the president should be a sociopath. I don't know. But anyway, putting her aside, like, if there was a candidate in 2016, honestly, like Bernie, who would have just said, like, we're giving healthcare to all people, we're gonna get education to everybody, and if you had a Democrat like that, like an FDR style Democrat, I just don't think Trump could have competed against. So I think Hillary was kind of the perfect candidate for Trump in
Oh,
2016.
totally,
She was
totally.
the perfect foil because she was like the first Democrat who really broke with that kind of working class tradition of Democrats, and she was kind of
Yeah,
this neoliberal, and she fit perfectly into his moniker of globalist, which is a globalist wants endless
yeah,
war. He wants to
yeah,
outsource all of our jobs, and he wants or she wants mass immigration. That's what a globalist is. And Hillary Clinton, to a lot of voters, embodied those three things. And so yeah, she was kind of like the perfect foil for him. Obviously, I don't think that's true anymore because now when Kamala Harris is, Goldman Sachs supports my plan, Trump says, actually, I went to the Wharton School and you're a Marxist. And like, that's a very different approach than he had in 2016. So,
yeah. Well, I would have loved to see Bernie versus Trump. Oh, that was like my dream. I would have loved to have known how that came out.
and it's
Although,
funny because you look at Bernie.
although I think he would have been assassinated if he won. So I don't. So I guess maybe it's good that he didn't. But I don't know.
I don't know. I think that I mean Bernie's still he's doing better than Joe Biden after all these years. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like a lot of Joe Biden, for example, tried to do this student debt relief, and the Supreme Court shot him down on that. So I assume that's basically what would have happened to Bernie. Is Bernie would go up there and he would say, "We need national health care for all," and nothing would happen. Congress would not move on it. If he tried an executive order, it would get shot down by the courts. So I basically think, 4 years of Bernie would have been a lame duck presidency, and then people would have been dissatisfied with that, and they would have, gone on.
Man, what an alternate universe that would be, though, huh? I mean, God, it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how. I don't know how Trump. Yeah, it's hard to tell. And like some of this, I guess the way that I look at Bernie Sanders is as a third party candidate. I also think of Trump in a certain way as a kind of third party candidate.
Yeah,
In that tradition of insurgent campaigns, Pat Buchanan, Ross Perot,
yeah,
George Wallace, these types of people who are critical of both parties. They're not really loyal to either camp. And that's kind of how I mean, I think he is an independent in Vermont, and then he ran as a Democrat. But yeah, so I
well,
think
I guess it's more like what I wonder about, because I mean, listen, nobody can really do anything in Washington, like, at least the way the margins have been in the filibuster. It's just nobody can do anything. Um, but it's more like the cultural effects, because at least in my mind, a lot of the woke kind of insanity was a reaction to Trump. Just people were so upset, and it really did derange. Trump derangement syndrome is real. I mean, I know a lot of people who became way more liberal, left, woke, whatever you want to call it, because of Trump, really. And I just think the opposite would have happened if Bernie had become president. There would have been a crazy reaction to a socialist supposedly being in the White House, and it would have, there's always a cultural sort of backlash that happens with whoever's president. And seems like nowadays whoever's president, 60% of the country is going to hate no matter what.
yeah, yeah, that's true. I guess I think that it's a feedback loop. So I think Trump accelerated, amplified, and agitated the left and made
Yep.
them more crazy. But I also think a large degree of why Trump was elected is because he called out political correctness in a way that only
Mhm.
Trump could do. And
Yeah.
political correctness, I think, is just an earlier version of woke,
Yeah.
essentially. So yeah, it's a cycle between the two sides of constant escalation.
Yeah.
Would Bernie have been a de-escalation? Probably. Yeah, I think someone like Bernie Sanders who could say like I'm 100% a leftist, but I'm kind of an old school leftist. I'm focused on economics first. I'm not really like Hillary Clinton. Again, even though she was capitalist in her orientation, well, she's a woman, and you look back at the
Yeah.
party platform, and it's about LGBTQ, and it's about
Yeah.
all of these, and this is coming, by the way, very fresh off the heels of this Obergefell ruling by the Supreme Court, where they
Right.
legalized or nationalized gay marriage. So at that time in 2016, gay marriage was not like a decided thing where like oh yeah, of course, we're all Americans, we all support gay marriage. And the funny thing is actually, talking about polarization, this is one of the areas where I think Trump depolarized the country in terms of saying, we're not going to talk about gay marriage anymore. I mean, he never
Yeah.
explicitly said that, but it's like, how can you be a Trump supporter alongside Dave Rubin and Peter Thiel and all the rest, and hate gay people? It's just very, there's a fringe minority of far right people, but they don't actually like Trump as much as they did in 2016, because they've seen like, okay, Trump is just, you're never going to get Mike Huckabee again. You're never going to get Rick Santorum. That's not happening. So he actually, I think, on that specific issue, did depolarize the country.
Hmm.
Now, maybe that was going to happen eventually anyway. But I could see a guy like Ted Cruz, for example, saying like, I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. And then we would just continue beating that dead horse for the next 4 years or however long. It was really funny when Charlie Kirk was doing his tour, and he said something like, I believe there are two genders. You have to choose one or the other. So it's like, even though he's trying to be this conservative, he's trying to be this right-wing, far-right guy, like even then he has to like say like it's legitimate to be transgender implicit. And of course he had Rob Smith up with him on the stage doing that. So it was clear by that point, it's like gay people are welcome in the Republican Party. And I think you have to credit Trump with that to a large degree. Now, unfortunately, having all these gay people in the Republican Party hasn't at the same time resulted in like smart people and educated people and upwardly mobile people going to the Republican Party. So it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory in that respect.
Well,
Um,
I mean, you're making me think about all these conspiracy type. I don't know. I, I
Lay it
just
on me. What's the conspiracy?
well, no, I'm just like, are you worried? There's just a lot of them, and I'm wondering, like, were they always there and just nobody knew because they didn't have a way to talk where you could hear them and see them talking? Or are there more now? I mean, I'm just like, I don't know. There's some woman on Substack that had something about RFK that I looked at the other day, and she's just got thousands and thousands of like likes and comments, and I swear they're all psychotic, like just these RFK psychos
Yeah, I mean, Richard
who are
Hanania.
just, fully like in their comments, they sound like they're in a cult, like just crazy people.
Well, there's this concept of the Dale Gribble voter, and these were people who historically just didn't vote. Like they just didn't vote because they thought,
Maybe they should have.
yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. I think that people who so what is a conspiracy theory at a psychological level? There's two ways we can look at it. We can say it's kind of a stochastic mutation. It's a disease. It's like a malformation, whatever, and it's just random, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. The other way to look at it is more of a psychological or sociological perspective, saying that there is a logical causal chain, and I would there's a very long history of conspiracy theories in America, going back to the anti-Freemasonic Party in the 19th century, and then you had the Whig Party went and became the Know Nothing Party. So yeah, you had, and then the KKK was actually based off the Freemasons. So like you have a whole back and forth between secret societies in America, conspiracy theories about them. But I would say that the moment where because obviously after the Civil War, the country consolidated. We had this era of good feelings. We had a lot of industrialization. We had a lot of immigration, and so the country from the Civil War was going through this healing process. We had Reconstruction, and then we had this gentleman's agreement between the North and the South, where you had segregation in the South and you had freedom in the North. And people were just kind of generally getting along. You had Woodrow Wilson coming in there, and he reinstituted the Federal Reserve. We had a war in Europe. Americans were quite united and quite optimistic, and the idea that there's some secret cabal controlling us and destroying the country, that was kind of hard to push because the country was doing really well. Like everyone was getting rich and great things were happening. Like railroads are being built. But I would say the moment where conspiracy, like there's a new wave of conspiracy. Before the Second World War, there was the America First faction with Father Coughlin and Charles Lindbergh, and they said, like, the Jews are trying to get us into a war, and we need to call them out, and we need to stop this process from happening. So that was kind of the first wave of that, which was then suppressed during the Second World War. Like, Father Coughlin was banned from the airwaves. Charles Lindbergh, gave up and supported the war effort. And after the war, there was kind of a calm before the storm. But, you have these third-party candidates, and their issue was segregation. Strom Thurmond, 1948, and then, of course, George Wallace, 1968. These third-party candidates were winning massive support. It's not usual at all in a two-party system. Very embarrassing, threatened to turn the election over to Congress, which in the midst of the Cold War was, again, very embarrassing because we were a democracy, right? So the majority rules. Well, if you can't pick, if the two-party system doesn't work because there's this third-party insurgency and Congress decides the presidency, that kind of undermines this superficial story of democracy. So that was an insurgency that in 1968 started to decline, started to go away, but it didn't go away because people just stopped being mad at the federal government over desegregation. It went away because all of those segregationists started to sublimate their segregationism into more covert issues. So instead of talking about segregation, they talk about busing. Instead of talking about busing, they talk about welfare, and so on and so forth. And it gets to the tax code, right? So that whole sublimation process. Kevin Phillips, he didn't invent the Southern strategy, but he helped popularize it with a book, influential on Goldwater, influential on Nixon, and that kind of created this conservative realignment, the purpose of which was to create a permanent conservative majority, which was then disrupted with moving toward the evangelical movement with Reagan. And so what originally was about race, segregation was a racial issue, then became sublimated and twisted and turned with organizations like the John Birch Society, the Sovereign Citizens. And this is really where you get this total flip away from what was originally a white racial issue into becoming and what was originally anti-communist issue, like with McCarthy. And then it became this general, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, all of those energies, which had been developing for decades and decades and building all this underground force and pressure, when the Soviet Union fell, all of a sudden that boogeyman of global communism that they had been talking about for decades and decades, they now had to redirect that energy in a different direction. And so that's why I think in the 1990s, you get this huge shift away from like traditional right-wing conspiracy theories, which, the communists control the government and, they're trying to racially mix us all together. All of that became sublimated and directly influenced people like Alex Jones and, later on, people like Joe Rogan. And so, I think there was a trauma as a country that we experienced during desegregation, which led to a loss of faith in the idea that America is a democracy because, we have this voting system, we have states' rights, we have all these institutional checks and balances and things, and the Supreme Court just ran roughshod over that. Now, you could say that's for the greater good, and we support that, but the reaction to that, which Felix Frankfurter, one of the Supreme Court justices who ruled in Brown v. Board, he said, we have to be careful about this, because if you jam this too fast and too quick down the throats of the American people, there is going to be a reaction, and we don't know exactly what that will be. And I think you can make a convincing argument historically that reaction metastasized, it kind of grew in the dark, like the mold spores, and it eventually mutated into what we have today, which is fairly logically dissociated from anti-communism and pro-segregationism. Like, there's not really a whole lot of direct logical connection between J or RFK and like the John Birch Society or something. But I think if you actually track the individuals who were involved and these ideological progressions over time, I think that there's a case to be made that that's where this original traumatic loss of confidence in the government comes from. And eventually it just continues to get crazier and crazier until now it's just like all about the vaccines, or it's about I don't know, the Illuminati or lizard people. I don't know. There's a million different conspiracy theories out there. So, but that's
I would like to have some kind of a demographic study on sort of conspiracy people in general. Like where they live. I get a sense there's a lot of them in the Western United States in general. Compared to the Northeast, certainly. I don't know about. I've never lived in the South, so I don't know what's going on down there. But I, I don't know. I mean, I'm far more afraid of people that seem out of touch with reality and hold illogical beliefs very strongly, that don't have any good support and that seem, like this type of belief than I am actually of. Like my enemies probably are more your classic conservative, but the the crazy people really unnerve me. I mean, just because who knows what they do, and you can't reason with them, right? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I like our country. I think we have more than most countries because we built this country on people who got kicked out of or weren't doing well or otherwise probably weren't really wanted in their home countries, and they just decided I'll just go try something totally new that I have no idea what it's going to be across an ocean. They're probably more antisocial personality types in
Oh
general that kind of
no!
populated.
Don't say that about.
It's true.
Don't say that.
It's
I mean,
true.
but look at the Mormons. The Mormons perfectly fit everything you're saying, and yet
Well, the
they're the
Mormons
nicest
are people
people.
who follow a leader, though. The Mormons are a lot more obedient and like respectful of authority because they literally just followed a guy and walked across the country pushing a handcart,
Yeah.
which is
So
a pretty
I
weird
have
thing to do.
I have the
I mean,
opposite. I have the opposite theory, and I know we have to finish up soon, so I'll give my 30-second elevator pitch here, which is that it's not the people who picked up or got kicked out or whatever who created these conspiracy theories. It's the people who got left behind. So if you actually look at where conspiracy theory thinking is the highest, it's in the Rust Belt. It's in communities that have been devastated by deindustrialization. It's people who haven't
is
had
it
the
though? Are
social.
you sure about that? Do you know that?
I'm fairly sure that if you, I mean, the South, the Midwest, I'm saying rural areas. Rural areas
Uh huh.
generally are where there is the highest per capita percentage of conspiracy theories. And
Okay.
the reason why is because these people don't have the means or the ability to make their lives better. They are stuck. And if you are stuck in a downwardly mobile socioeconomic position, then a conspiracy theory is kind of the best you can do because you don't have agency of your life. So you really do feel like some puppet master is controlling everything and making your life horrible. And so a conspiracy theory makes a lot of sense to somebody like that. And so,
Mm.
the solution for that, I think, is we got to give more power to the people who are upwardly mobile and who don't have this like desire to destroy the United States and destroy democracy and all of these things, and who actually have a vested interest. Because if you have nothing to lose, then you're kind of like this Joker incel, like, oh, why don't we just burn it all down? Whereas if you're like, you go to college, you have a degree, you make some money, you're trying to get somewhere in life, then you're actually kind of like a shareholder in this country, and we should give people like that power and not the people who are, doing so badly that they want to lash out in resentment. But anyway, I know we don't have time left. I do want to give
Yeah.
you the final thoughts, final words. Tell me what you're working on. Tell me who we should be reading. Not the conspiracy theorists. Who's the good people? That's what I want to know. Let's leave on a positive note.
Oh boy, I don't know. I mean, there's so much fantastic stuff on Substack. Honestly, I mean, my problem is I just don't have time to read it all, or listen to it all. So I can't. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know, and I don't know who your audience is, but there's a lot of good people. You've interviewed a lot of good people. I mean, you have so much content. I can't get through it all. I do. Can I just ask you a question to part with? Because
Yeah.
one thing I'm curious about with you, uh, you seem to have a lot of knowledge about history that has to do with communism specifically and the Soviets. Or at least you talk about it more than anybody else I ever hear talk about it. I have personally always been very interested in learning more about the USSR, Soviets, and just the whole history about what happened. And I feel like it's impossible to do so because both sides were completely full of propaganda, right? In general, both sides. I don't know what was going on their side, but I assume it was basically the 180 of whatever propaganda we were getting over here. Like, where do you have recommendations on? Because I've looked and I try to find documentaries or books, and everything feels like inherently tainted by bias, and I really just would love to get some sort of more objective analysis of it.
Yeah, so it depends on what era you're looking at. If you're looking at pre-Soviet Bolsheviks,
I
um,
mean, pretty much all of it I'm interested
okay,
in.
I unfortunately, I am very broad in my education, so I'm not somebody to I don't have a ton of books to recommend on politics because my general strategy is to try to absorb as much as possible from as many people as possible and then try to create like a composite of that. But yeah, I would say that for pre Bolshevik, I think Sutton, I think Anthony Sutton, his work on kind of like the financing of the Bolsheviks, and then also I think the book is Icebreaker if you want to learn about the period between the founding of the Soviet Union and World War II. The period after World War II, I guess I wouldn't have any immediate recommendation for the period until Stalin's death. But I would say, I mean, I think basically after Stalin dies, the Soviet Union kind of gets very boring.
Hmm.
And I'm more American centric in my view of history, so I'm more studying like, okay, what was the State Department's attitude toward communism? And what you'll find is that a lot of people are actually sympathetic to communism. They just thought that the Soviet Union had the wrong form of it, and there are actually different
Hmm.
kinds of communism. So that's kind of how I analyze things like the Vietnam War. I look at it more from the American centric side, and I see the Soviet Union as more, yeah, clearly it was a superpower, did a lot of things. It had a relationship with China. Would I have a specific book to recommend? The last thing I guess I would shout out. I'm sorry, I'm not as well read as you assumed I was, but in
Well, you
terms
know a
of
lot about history, so I just
yeah, I
assume
just
that you
don't know
are.
books. I don't know. I
Yeah.
can't point to
Well, it
one
doesn't have to
person
be.
either.
In fact, I'll listen. I'm probably not going to read a book nowadays, but even an
Good.
article, a website,
Stop
something like
reading books.
that.
Spend more time reading my articles. Stop reading books. The last thing I would mention to close up the Soviet area would be just Google the phrase semi-bankershina. I might not be pronouncing that right in Russian, and also siloviki.
Sorry, what is this for? I don't.
Yeah,
What?
semi-bankershina refers to, and I can like put it in the show notes here, but
Okay.
it basically refers to the process by which the Soviet Union fell, and in Russian, it means seven bankers. And so
Okay.
it refers to the rise of the Russian oligarchs. And if you look at
Okay.
who those people were, they were all, they didn't fall out of a coconut tree.
Yeah.
They were people in the Soviet Union, and they conspired together to cause the collapse of the Soviet Union and a reorganization into what today we would call Putinism. So that's I think that's probably the most interesting and relevant in terms of studying Russia. And there is a distinction between, again, communism. I mean, FDR had a lot of communists working for him. FDR, in his meetings with Stalin, said, hey, you should take over India. And Stalin was like, what? I mean, that's part of the British Empire. We're not going to do that. And he's like, no, it's cool. Just invade India. Because FDR thought communism was a better system than British imperialism. So there's a history of communism, which goes back obviously to Marx and even prior to Marx.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's a history of Russia as an empire, and they obviously overlap and intersect. Incredibly complicated. And yeah, if anything, I guess I should just write a book myself, and then I could recommend that to you. But we're
Yeah,
not
maybe you
quite
should do
there
that.
yet.
I'm waiting for like the big dramatic prestige, HBO drama about it, or something, because I don't know, especially my generation, like grew up watching whatever that movie was the day after and all this crap. They're so programmed. Not like I'm not saying I'm a communist, but
That's
I
okay
just
with
would
me.
really love to get a bit, like, some kind of a view that shows what things were actually like on
Yeah.
and both sides of things, because it was so heavily propagandized on both sides that I
Yeah.
just feel like it's kind of a black hole.
So I have a little bit more intimate understanding, like the daily life of people in sort of East Germany,
Yeah.
than I would in Russia. East
Yeah.
Germany was the most successful communist country.
Right.
People will complain that East Germany was worse off than West Germany, which is true, but also Eastern Germany is still worse off today. And in fact, it was worse off before the First World War.
Right.
So
Right.
there's there in blaming communism for that, I don't think is for 100% of it. I don't think is entirely accurate. But yeah, we should definitely do this again, and maybe you could throw some questions at me, and maybe I can come with more prepared
Okay.
notes on what to reference and what to refer you to. But yeah, I think this was great. I really appreciate. I'm extremely sorry for some scheduling mix-ups, and I'm very grateful that we could overcome that and have a conversation because I think it was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, me too. And I'm sorry for being weird and asking you if you were suicidal when you first
Oh, that
contacted me. That was a sort of a weird coincidence that you had just happened to publish something that seemed very maudlin and meditating on death or something, and I just, and I hadn't read too much of your stuff at that point, so
I
was a little
appreciate
scared.
your concern. No one else reached out to ask how I was doing. They always say, "Oh, what does Deep Left think about it?" They never ask how is Deep Left. How is he
Uh,
feeling? So I
yeah.
appreciate it. But yeah, I'm feeling enthusiastic and optimistic after this interview. So
Good. Okay.
I'm hopeful for the future, and I want to live life and all
Great.
that good stuff. So let's cut it off there because I know
Okay.
you got to go. And
Yep.
yeah, I'll reach out and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Okay.
All
Have a
right,
good night.
take care. Bye
Bye.
bye. And that's over. So if you guys liked it, you got to like, you got to comment, you got to restack, you got to share on Twitter. That's all for now. Take care. Bye bye.